Hey everyone, welcome back to another hardware news recap for the week. In this one, we'll be talking about Intel getting on the list for TSMC's 3nm process alongside Apple. We'll also be going over AMD updating DLSS. AMD has officially shipped an update for Nvidia's DLSS. The update's called FSR. We'll be going over that. More Intel GPU details. Microsoft panicking in response to feedback on Windows 11 and backpedaling so hard it might trip over. We'll also be going over used mining GPUs beginning to surface on the market and a couple of industry news stories for the past week. Before that, this video is brought to you by Be Quiet and the Silent Base 802 case. The Silent Base 802 got high accolades in our review for its high build quality and its versatility in both silence-focused and airflow-focused builds. The 802 comes with swappable mesh panels or noise-damped panels, so you have options for either approach. The Silent Base 802 case is able to fit larger builds as well without being overbearing, and it stands out for its mechanics quality and assembly quality. Learn more about Be Quiet's new case at the link in the description below. So first up, just a quick section on what we're working on right now, and you can check the time bars over there if you'd like to skip it. But some stuff we're working on. First of all, there was a midweek news recap that we ran a couple days ago, and that talked about EVGA's X570 motherboards coming out. We have a lot of new information in there that wasn't previously known because we spoke with Kingpin from EVGA and with other reps at EVGA to get some details on the boards the company's working on. So if you missed that, you might be interested in it. Just kind of interesting because EVGA is moving some of its Intel-only stuff to AMD. We also covered a Ryzen software utility for overclocking in that. That is called Project Hydra. It's from one Usmus, the person who worked on things like the Ryzen DRAM calculator, for example. So we've got information from him in that as well, if you're curious. Now, as for stuff we're working on beyond that, we have some more Intel DG1 content coming up or on the channel already. We've got 2 more videos on that are coming out. We are working on a 7000D review. That case is out now. It's a Corsair case. It follows up the 4000 and the 5000D. Now the 7000D, not to spoil it, but 7000D, it has 2000 more Ds than the 5000D, actually 3000 more Ds than the 4000D. Obviously, that means something. So it's probably better. That's what we think that probably means, but we're gonna figure it out for you. We'll post it in a case review coming up probably in the next week or so. Some videos out there already about it, but we're working through the normal reviews process as we always do. We also have some more low-end cooler benchmarks coming up versus the 68-watt heat load. We just started using that for the Noctua NHP1 passive cooler, and that finally pushed us to get into gear on a 3600, 5600X style heat load to test coolers like AMD stock coolers or other lower-end tower coolers. So that's coming up. And finally, there's a RAM timings behind the scenes video up on patreon.com/gamersnexus, where Andrew and Patrick Stone talk through some of the work they've been doing on our refreshed RAM timing series with the multiple parts. And that's gonna be a while in the making yet still, because we're doing a lot of animations for it. So that's on Patreon. And then if you wanna grab one of these, the GN wireframe mouse mats, they are on the store, on store.gamersnexus.net. They are in stock and shipping now. We ordered a huge amount of them. We did that the last 2 or 3 times as well, and they always sell out really fast. I think maybe we might, last time we were doing pretty well. We got about a month or 2 of inventory in before we sold out of them. I think we might have done even better this time, but they still sell through quickly. Thank you for all the support for buying them. We're glad that you get something that is a high quality, usable product that also supports us. So everybody wins. Thanks for picking them up. And to those of you who've tweeted us the photos of your setups, everybody in our audience apparently has a better setup than I do. So they all look great. But thank you for the support, and you grab one on store.gamersnexus.net. Let's get started with the news items. So for this week, the first one we'll talk about is the 3nm process TSMC wish list from Intel and Apple up first. This is according to a report from Nikkei Asia Review, where Intel and Apple are listed as the earliest adopters of the 3nm process. So the report claims that Intel and Apple are already testing and validating their designs with TSMC, and it cites sources, quote, briefed on the matter. We already discussed rumors previously that Apple snatched up a sizable portion of TSMC's initial capacity, to no one's surprise really, but this is the first we're hearing about Intel claiming any. As for what products will be using the 3nm process from TSMC, at least early on, it looks like Apple's iPad line will probably be the first from Apple to use 3nm silicon from TSMC. And as far as Intel goes, they have two product lines that are rumored in the works for it. One is on notebooks and one is on data center. Those are both fairly high volume businesses for Intel, or at least on the data center side, high revenue, if not high volume. And so they are keystones for the company's income every quarter. Now, more interesting maybe is that TSMC is already allocating more capacity for Intel than Apple, at least right now, which would be a surprise. We're a little bit reluctant to believe that. Apple is a massive customer for TSMC, so we'll see. We'll see how that pans out. Intel's a big company as well, but I mean, Apple. So beyond that, what we know currently comes from we've got a quote from Nikkei Asia Review actually. It says, quote, currently the chip volume planned for Intel is more than that of Apple's iPad using the 3nm process. The media outlet reached out to TSMC, Apple, and Intel for comments. Intel only reiterated its partnership with TSMC for its 2023 products, while TSMC declined to comment as Taiwan Semiconductor doesn't comment on its customers' products, and that's really how most of these companies act. Apple, for its part, did not respond to the request for a comment. Up next, AMD updated Nvidia DLSS. AMD shipped an update called FSR a little while ago. We benchmarked it. So Fidelity FX Super Resolution, as we said in the Fidelity FX Super Resolution sort of review and image quality analysis, it's not meant to be a DLSS direct competitor, but they sort of market it in the same category of software designed for GPUs to improve performance, and it works differently. And we talk about that in the review if you're curious about how it works differently. We went over that in a whole section. But the point is that even though it's not meant to be a sort of direct competitor to DLSS, that's how it's being received in a lot of ways. And so, as you would expect, NVIDIA has now updated DLSS in response, it would seem at least, to FSR. NVIDIA would probably claim that it's been working on this update. But there's a few things that make it seem a little bit more like a response than like something that was already in the works. So AMD is obviously not literally updating DLSS, but the change from NVIDIA is that it introduces a new setting called ultra quality, which is something that it was specifically lacking and that AMD had in its. Now, if this seems arbitrary and like just a name of a setting that is non-standardized and doesn't actually need to relate to anything or be used by any company, then you're correct in thinking that it seems that way. But that's not going to stop companies from marketing against each other by using a name with ultra in it, which of course establishes a hierarchy of being the best and then using it for their own product. So AMD's FSR followed NVIDIA's naming scheme and resolution scaling actually with a performance mode, a balanced mode, and quality mode that equaled NVIDIA's DLSS scale factors. And we could put a chart of one of those on the screen. NVIDIA differentiated itself with its own ultra performance mode, and all of this of course came out before FSR. It was the first with a feature like this, at least to this degree. And ultra performance, it's much lower quality and it's higher performance than AMD's FSR, but because NVIDIA can train its solution, it has some advantages that make it able to reduce the pixel data input and perhaps get an image that's still usable out the other end. Either way, AMD is differentiating itself with ultra quality, or at least it was. This is a scale factor closer to 1.0 than the others at around 77% input resolution, and not to be outdone by something called ultra quality, NVIDIA decided to now work on its own ultra quality mode. We'll see if that's the final name for it. Frankly, we're surprised that NVIDIA didn't decide to name it something like Thai quality or maybe super quality, ultra extreme quality. There's a lot of things that would seem better than what AMD is doing, but no, it's ultra quality right now. So maybe the industry is at a point of agreeing a little bit on names for once. That would be a nice thing with USB-IF and Intel, for example. The discovery of this new mode was made by Ryan Hardovic over on NVIDIA's subreddit, where the user spotted NVIDIA and a change noted in Unreal Engine 5's DLSS documentation. At this time, specific details about the scaling and resolution support are unknown or unclear. DLSS version 2.2.9.0, though, should coincide with this rollout. And NVIDIA is actively updating DLSS as it has been. Up next, Broadcom, MediaTek, and Marvell apparently supporting NVIDIA's buyout of ARM. So there's a list of ARM licensees who, we're going to use the word seemingly here, support the NVIDIA ARM acquisition. It's also a growing list of companies that oppose the Nvidia ARM acquisition, mostly for the reasons you would expect, like not being an independent company anymore that is potentially part of a competitor. So there's no shortage of licensees to oppose the deal. Qualcomm most recently is the one that was in the news for opposing the Nvidia ARM acquisition. And Qualcomm suggested, as we said in the news video last week, that ARM basically go public and or have a consortium of technology company supporters instead who all have a stake in the company. This time, Broadcom, MediaTek, and Marvell all came out to approve of the deal. This is according to The Times, a paper in the UK, that says these companies have broken rank to support Nvidia as the regulatory process heats up in the UK. The report from the UK Times is paywalled, but it doesn't seem there's much in the way of statements or explanations anyway for the newfound support for the $40 billion purchase of ARM. Meanwhile, the UK's Secretary of State for Digital, Culture, Media and Sport recently stepped in to block the deal on the grounds of national security concerns, and the UK's Competition and Markets Authority, or CMA, is currently preparing a report on the potential antitrust and national security implications of such a deal. That report is due out by the end of July, so we'll know more then, and it should serve as a way to inform how the UK's regulatory bodies approach the deal. Additionally, the Nvidia ARM deal has hit expected hurdles worldwide, including the US and China. As always, we'll continue to watch these updates closely because this story has major implications for the entire industry. Intel had a presence at the 2021 International Supercomputing Conference, and this time it was talking about its Ponte Vecchio GPUs and its Sapphire Rapids CPUs. So this includes some information on its next generation Xeon scalable CPUs and the Xe HPC-based Ponte Vecchio. Intel Sapphire Rapids is an increasingly important platform and one that Intel powered on just over a year ago. Sapphire Rapids will be the platform for its biggest supercomputer victory to date, which is the Aurora supercomputer. And it'll also be the vehicle for Intel to debut its own DDR5 support, as well as PCIe Gen 5 and CXL 1.1 support, of course, among other technologies. Now, Intel has announced a new fold for Sapphire Rapids. There will be variants that come with onboard HBM, or high bandwidth memory. Intel Sapphire Rapids with HBM will, of course, be of particular interest to those in its HPC markets, and Intel, in its press release on its website, was quick to quote several professionals from national laboratories, such as Argonne National Laboratory, where Aurora will live, and Los Alamos National Labs, which is the home of the Crossroads supercomputer. Intel at this point hasn't told us what type of HBM it's going to be using. There are seveseveral out there, HBM, HBM2, HBM2E, etc. And it also noted that the CPUs could be used with or without system memory. So that's actually pretty interesting, and that's the aspect we're the most interested in, seeing if that ever sort of comes down the chain to consumer stuff at some point in the distant future. In addition to HBM, Intel also officially confirmed its new AI acceleration engine that will appear on Sapphire Rapids, and that is called Advanced Matrix Extensions, or AMX. Moving on to Ponte Vecchio, Intel announced a few new details. Intel's Ponte Vecchio is based on Intel's Xe HPC silicon and was successfully powered on earlier this year. Intel now states that Ponte Vecchio is currently in the process of system validation, and it'll arrive in an OCP accelerator module, or OAM, form factor. Intel will also offer Ponte Vecchio in subsystems, offering either 4 or 8 OAM packages. Of course, the first silicon for it is destined for the Aurora supercomputer, but this is the first time Intel has detailed its plans for Ponte Vecchio outside of supercomputers. As expected, there's been a deluge of information as Microsoft took the lid off of its Windows 11 announcement and the ensuing, what's known in the technical world as big oof that followed. And this was because of Microsoft's CPU and TPM requirements, which stirred up no shortage of both confusion and criticism. Initially, Microsoft stated that CPU support would begin with Intel's 8th generation or 8th series, so it'd be 8700K, for example, 8600K, and also that it would begin with AMD's Ryzen 2000 series. Ryzen 1000, the initial came out around 2017 or so, and it's also around when the 8th series came out from Intel. Now, this in itself didn't disqualify the older CPUs. If you look at Windows 10, for example, there are plenty of CPUs that are technically unsupported that support Windows 10 or run Windows 10 just fine, but it was no less disappointing to see Microsoft so hyper-focused on newer hardware And of course, you think outside the consumer space where people are a little more conscious about what they're spending and using. You look at the corporate spaces, and most of the big companies are going to play exactly by the book and follow the specs that it officially supports. So that does start to limit what's usable with Windows 11 in those environments. Now, in an effort to smooth over the hardware concerns, among others, Microsoft stated in a blog post that it's working to validate systems using Intel's 7th gen CPUs, which came out in about January of the same year as the 8th gen CPUs, and which are functionally the same as Intel's 6th and 4th gen CPUs, and we don't talk about 5. So they're doing a little bit better. They're also adding Ryzen 1000 CPU official support, but that's where it stops for both of them. Additionally, Microsoft received no shortage of criticism for its laughable PC Health Check app, which offered literally zero insight as to why a machine was or wasn't supported. In fact, the open source app Why Not Win 11 proved more useful online. As such, Microsoft announced that it has pulled the app from downloads, citing the need to address user feedback, namely that it wants to make the tool do something. It said, quote, based on the feedback so far, we acknowledge that it was not fully prepared to share the level of detail or accuracy you expected from us on why a Windows 10 PC doesn't meet upgrade requirements. There was also some level of confusion around Windows 11 would roll out. To be clear, Windows 11 has a free upgrade path to current and eligible Windows 10 users, though those rollouts won't happen until some point during the first half of 2022. Microsoft will begin rolling out certified Win 11 devices in late 2021, they say around October, and it noted that the rollout would take place across several months. Microsoft just released the first preview build of Windows 11 to Windows insiders, where it expects to collect feedback in a number of areas. Because obviously, Microsoft noted that during this time, the feedback will inform its decision on the minimum hardware requirements going forward. Up next, TeamGroup is the first memory vendor that we've seen anyway, out the door with available DDR5 modules, despite the dearth of CPUs and motherboards actually supporting the new memory, the emergent memory. TeamGroup's Elite DDR5 4800 kit has surfaced first, and it has listings on both Amazon and Newegg right now. Both of the retailers do show this kit out of stock or unavailable. So whether you can get it's a different story. But TeamGroup's Elite DDR5 4800 kit is 32 gigabytes, 16 by 2, with two 16 gigabyte UDIMM modules rated at 4800 megatransfers per second. As expected, the DIMMs come with on-die ECC and an onboard PMIC. TeamGroup's first DDR5 kit also has timings of CL 40, 40, 40, 77. It's got a CAS latency of 40 and an operating voltage of 1.1 volts. Both retail listings show the kit price at $311 US, and it looks like they're expected to ship at some point in July. The first consumer platform to support DDR5 will be Intel's Alder Lake. That platform is currently not, well, it's officially announced. Intel did show it in its disaster of a keynote again, but it's rumored for announced late 2021. We don't have much information about it beyond that, around the other than the release date, and it'll be a while before you can actually really use DDR5 in the consumer market anyway. So DDR5 will also take a while to scale beyond the best of DDR4. As a reminder, the switchover period from when stuff changes, like say from DDR3 to DDR4, that period of time, the new memory is not advanced to the point where if you have really high-end existing memories, DDR4, versus brand new, what will eventually be low-end DDR5, there's not normally that big of a performance gap there, and sometimes it favors the older kit instead. It just depends on the architecture of the CPU and the platform you're buying for, of course.
Thanks, Steve.
Up next, the used GPU market changing. So as a result of China's crackdown on cryptocurrency, the first wave of used mining GPUs, at least en masse, has appeared online for the aftermarket. And this was reported by PC Gamer, where screenshots posted to the Taiwanese bulletin board PTT were showing a growing count of Nvidia and AMD GPUs for sale. And the GPUs range from Nvidia's RTX 30 series and AMD's RX 6000 series at the newer side of things to older cards, like, of course, AMD's Polaris-based cards. That'd be the RX 400 and 500 series. Ethereum miners have been especially fond of the Polaris-based cards in the past, so it's not really much of a surprise that they're starting to pop up on PTT. According to HKEPC, the used price for an RTX 3070 is about 3120 Hong Kong dollars, which works out to around 400 USD. Other cards are priced similarly. The RTX 3060 Ti, for example, is around $309 US. The 3060 non-Ti is $244. However, the cards are also being sold in bulk. and they are also used mining cards, which means they've likely been in service 24/7. It's the bulk aspect, though, that'll make it harder to deal with. That said, this is the latest of several developments that could mean GPU prices and availability are coming back down to earth. We recently reported that ASRock was optimistic about GPU price and stock, especially as it expects AMD's supply of GPUs will improve during the second quarter, or at this point rolling towards third quarter of 2021. It's not just GPU shortages as in the physical piece of silicon that were a problem, though. It's things like substrates and components, too. ASRock commented on that last week. We talked about it as well, where it said it expects substrate shortages to improve later this year. Now, moreover, popular coins like Ethereum and Bitcoin, at least recently, as of this filming, changes all the time, have dropped in profitability. This also affects the dumping of used mining cards on the market and how fast that's happening. Ethereum's moving eventually, in theory, to a proof of stake model, which, moving away from proof of work, will also be beneficial to GPU supply. So things might be lining up in a way that's beneficial for those of you who still need to get in on a GPU, even if it is used, and it's just a matter of well, how the cryptocurrencies behave at this point, because they seem completely erratic and difficult to predict. So who knows? We'll see what happens. Micron will sell its 3D XPoint fab to Texas Instruments. Texas Instruments, of course, also known as TI. Micron just announced that it would sell off its Lehi, Utah fab previously when it said it would exit the 3D XPoint memory business. And Micron intended to have the fab sold by end of 2021, although at that time it disclosed no details on potential sale options. Micron recently announced that its 3D XPoint memory fab will be sold to Texas Instruments. Micron states that the economic value of the sale is $1.5 billion, with $900 million coming from TI for the purchase of the facilities, and the remaining $600 million coming from secondary sales, like fab tooling and assets. Micron's press release didn't state much of what Texas Instruments plans to do with the fab, not really much of a surprise there, other than to deploy its own technologies. TI will be, can't say that without thinking of TI now, TI will also attempt to retain all of the fab's existing employees, it says, once the transaction closes. It also said in its own press release that it plans to overhaul the fab for 65 nanometer and 45 nanometer production for analog and embedded processors. Once the purchase closes, this will be TI's fourth fab of this type. TI currently has DMOS 6, RFab 1, and the soon-to-be completed RFab 2 wafer fabrication facilities. Worthy of note is just how long Intel will be able to buy 3D XPoint memory from Micron for. At this point, the wafer agreement between the two parties expires at the end of 2021, and with this sale and Micron's exit from the business, a new agreement will obviously not be possible. Intel will have to set up its own lines for any products using Optane memory in the future if it decides to keep making it, although a lot of that starts getting into data center and enterprise markets that we don't cover too closely. Up next, the same modder responsible for the resurrection of the 3DFX Voodoo 5 6000 that we reported on previously has brought back another GPU from the dead. These are fun projects, they're really cool. It's not like you can do a whole lot with it other than think that it's cool, but that's nice to have every now and then too. So the modder we speak of is Anthony, I'm not gonna try, sorry, we'll put the name on the screen. My apologies. And as documented by a YouTube video from Michael Dale, which is a name that I can say, I think. The latest creation is a combination of a 16 megabyte Voodoo 3 3500 and a 4 megabyte Power VR device, that's the PCX2. The design is a custom creation from, we're gonna go with Anthony, normally I use the last name, but we're gonna go with Anthony, who has combined both of the aforementioned retro GPUs atop a black PCB, which looks great, by the way. And the Voodoo 3 3500 runs at 183 megahertz. That's right. Get in line for this one. This will be the GPU of the future. Voodoo, I think they're gonna be the one. Nvidia is probably not long for this world. So the 183 megahertz GPU has access to 16 megabytes of SD-RAM via 8 SD-RAM packages. The PCX2 runs at 66 megahertz with 4 megabytes of SD-RAM. The board also features a pass-through port and circuitry to allow for another graphics card to be looped in. And the board also features a special jumper for overclocking the PCX2 to 80 megahertz. Both GPUs make use of passive heat sinks, although it seems active cooling is recommended depending on the clock speeds. The board also uses a standard PCI slot rather than a PCIe slot. And in all seriousness, if someone could post a guide on how to say that name, I'd really appreciate the guide because it'll probably come up again. Tried using Google. I don't trust the results I got, but let me know how to say it, and we'll do that next time. Next time we come across one of these awesome mods by Anthony. All right, Samsung and Synopsys collaborating on 3nm GAA process. This will be our last story for this week. Samsung and Synopsys announced that through their collaboration, Samsung has been able to achieve first pass silicon for an SoC using Samsung's 3GAA process. Samsung's 3GAA process is based on what Samsung is calling 3nm and uses GAA FETs, or gate all-around transistors. These types of transistors are largely the future for scaling silicon, and we've discussed them numerous times in news stories recently. Neither company went into details on the GAA transistors being used. Samsung at this point has long been working on a proprietary MBC FET, which is a multi-bridge channel FET, and it's based on nanosheets. But like other GAA FETs, nanosheets will allow for tuning performance or power consumption by augmenting the nanosheet width. There's a quote here as well. The GAA transistor structure marks a key inflection point in process technology advancement that's critical in maintaining the scaling trajectories needed for the next wave of hyperscale innovation by Synopsys. In addition to this tape out, Samsung's customers will have access to Synopsys technology files through Samsung Foundry, so presumably Samsung Foundry clients will also have access to similar designs. And Synopsys, if you don't know, is a silicon design company that's focused on design, verification, IP, and software. That's it for the news this week. Thanks as always for watching. You can subscribe for more. Go check out the channel for some of our follow-up DG1 standalone video card coverage. Or you can go to store.gamersnexus.net to grab one of our mouse mats, or patreon.com/gamersnexus to see that new behind the scenes video. Thanks for watching. We'll see you all next time.